Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, we've got another interesting group of comments from the YouTube channel. I'm going to go ahead and read through some of those. Some of these are extremely interesting, but if you hear your comment read, you can assume that I would love you to reach out to me about what you experienced at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. First one comes on the Pennsylvania police officer episode. Number, I think it's 425, maybe not. Yeah, it's 425. User is Junebug. My lifetime friend from high school, now deceased from sea, was a huge outdoorsman, deer hunter, etc. He sent me a photo of a track he found at his deer camp. He stopped by one day telling me he wasn't going back to deer camp anymore by himself, and I said, why? He said on the last day of deer season he hunted by himself, and he said as he was walking to a stand, he had a pair of deer antlers and was rattling them together, rattling them on trees, etc. And he got to a stand and climbed up, and after a few minutes he started hearing wood knocks to his right, then a little later he heard them to his left. I said, you know, chipmunks make a popping sound, and he said, no, this wasn't chipmunks. He said it sounded like a baseball bat hitting a hardwood tree. Then he said something heavy ran up behind the tree, and when he eased around to see what it was, there was nothing there. He said what really freaked him out is while he was in a stand, he heard a snickering or a laughing up above him. And he got really scared and said he only had 3 cartridges in his rifle. So he went ahead and filled the box magazine, and just before dark started down the tree. And once on the ground and took a couple steps once again, something heavy ran up behind him, and as he spun around expecting to see a deer or something, nothing was there. This friend did not do drugs of any kind. Several weeks later, he called me and asked if I would like to ride down to his camp so he could place some game cameras up, and I said yes. A couple days later, early one morning, he came and got me. We were laughing and talking about old times, but once we pulled up to his deer camp, his demeanor totally changed. I'd never seen him act like that. He got dead serious, and I didn't even know there were weapons in the truck with him. He laid the seat forward and came out with an SKS with 30-round mag and handed it to me. Then he came out with a .357 revolver in a holster and said, strap that on your side. Then he came out with an AK-47 with 30-round mag for himself and strapped on a 10mm semi-auto pistol on his side. He was truly scared. On the way down, he was telling me that at times he would be in the woods at deer camp and see what he called blurs go running by him so fast he couldn't determine what it was on several occasions. He took me down to a hollow by a creek and showed me the footprint that he sent me on text. It was still there, even though it had been rained on a few times, and we walked all over the woods that day and placed game cameras, but I myself didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary. He passed not long after that, and I never got to ask him if he got any photos. Sorry, folks, I got long-winded and wrote a novel here, but I wish he had have lived. That was interesting. Thank you for sharing your friend's legacy. A comment from Joey came in on the Alaska episode 485. Said, so where can we listen about something unzipping your tent? Easiest way to find out more about that is to go to Tate Hieronymus's YouTube channel. And there you can find his Sasquatch: A Search for Sabe documentary series. You want to find the first Iowa episode, and that's one of the ones that I was in, and we talk about the zipping noise that I captured on my audio. So there you go. A lot of people have liked the Carrie from Tennessee series. There's an interesting comment that came in. Harold writes, I will be starting soon to drive my Colorado ZR2 more frequently on logging roads down by Newport in, is it Cook County? I don't know. Let me know in the comments how I'm supposed to pronounce that. The area is located in the rolling foothills of the Cherokee National Forest. A guy working at the Interstate 40 Tennessee Welcome Center told me back in late April about lots of Bigfoot activity in that county. The guy told me he knows an older guy he knows whom has been gifting them food for years. I'd love to talk to that guy. On the Uwharrie Bigfoot house attack short, Francis writes, I drove down to Low Water Bridge the other day, sitting at the parking area for a while. No one else around. I got out of my truck to take some pics of the bridge, and then I heard this cry sound about 100 yards away. It lasted for about 15 seconds. Nothing I'd ever heard before. By the time I got my phone up and hit record, the yells died down. Then I heard some crunching in the leaves ways away. I pulled out of there. That's interesting. There was episode 483, a lot of Bigfoot encounters I released. Joan writes, no, he doesn't. I live in Alabama and have had experiences. Please reach out. From the Bigfoot Ranch Part 2 episode 464, Pat writes, I live not too far from this area. I've been to the store in Cantrell, which is Cantrell, Iowa, many times. I saw a mountain lion in my hayfield one morning, so I believe her about the mountain lion sightings. I've never seen a Bigfoot, but I've experienced something whistling and stomping their feet when I was taking a walk one night. I found several dead deer, especially bucks, with their heads separated from their bodies. When my oldest stepdaughter was living with us, she would take her dog out at night so he could do his business before bedtime, and she would sit on the front step smoking and talking to her dog. A couple of nights she came hurrying back into the house, freaked out because something on the bluff behind the barn was repeating everything she was saying to her dog. Also one night when she was coming home from work around midnight, she saw something big and hairy standing on two legs in the road ditch. She drove right by it, and it really freaked her out. Van Buren County is absolutely insane, but probably beautiful. I haven't been there yet. Back to Carrie's first episode, which is 484. Brad writes, I live 40 minutes east of her. Y'all never believe the things I've encountered on my farm. I'd love to talk to you, Brad. Reach out. Joe writes, I absolutely believe her, but have to ask, did the scream that first time not wake her husband? Is it possible that they can control who hears their screams? Thank you. This is really interesting because I had a gentleman come up to my booth at Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, and he said, I have a theory to share with you that's really weird. And what if it's when you hear everything go quiet in the woods that they are actually controlling what we hear? It's an interesting theory, kind of lines up with what this comment has as well. Here's a comment that came in on episode 483, which was a group of Bigfoot encounters. And Garrett writes, about the woman who lives in Armstrong, PA. I live in Du Bois, PA. Probably mispronounced that. Just down the road from her. And she was talking about the pig-faced dogmen. But my father used to tell us about them. But he said they were called whistle pigs. Dad has since passed, but he started camping alone on the family farm when he was 7 years old with his bedroll and his lantern and book, and he was happy and content spending his time in the woods, LOL. A tradition I have continued myself with my own daughters. Watch out for the whistle pigs, guys. Same episode, Bobby writes, I live on Washington Coast, heard some things in the Wynoochee Valley, grew up on the Chehalis River. I've collected many of the stories from the local tribe and friends and relatives. Bobby, please reach out. Robbie also writes, I live a couple miles away from Lapway in the Clearwater River. Too cool. Thanks for sharing. A friend and me found a kill site once in the area, and my dad and me were confronted with the smell one time. Same episode. Lee Jennifer writes, got him in southeast Oklahoma. Just caught a family swimming in a pond at night right outside where we live. Everyone post where you're from and what activities you see going on there. Tracker Jerry Williams and lead Tracker E have a book out called Predator Bigfoot and the Spiritual Warrior's Path. They're teaching people how to track and identify Bigfoot and their structures. Lee Jennifer, if you'd like to reach out about what you saw, that would be cool. Back to the Pennsylvania police officer, episode 425. Edward writes, I find this very interesting. I live in rural Indiana, Grew up hunting and fishing and all outdoor activities. I had an experience when I was 19. I was out hunting. I'm at one with nature, and I can tell when something is wrong. And all of a sudden, my environment went silent, and I smelled this awful smell. All of a sudden, it was like this roar I'd never heard before. I saw this figure standing by this tree, and all of a sudden, I got this rock thrown at me, and it started to make this roar again. I had a 300 Win Mag, and I was scared. I took off running out of the woods as fast as I could. It was a terrifying experience. I ran home and told my father. He didn't want to believe me until we went back and saw these huge footprints. And I had a mental note at how high it was on the tree, right at 9 feet. I'm 46 now and disabled in a wheelchair, and I haven't been out in the woods in years. In the Encounter Group, episode 483, Rosebud writes, my encounter was near Mount St. Helen, or Mount Helen in Washington in 2005. Never been out. And please reach out. Episode 327 is an Iowa presentation I did at the Van Meter Visitor Festival in Carolina. Writes, I had 3 encounters as a child in Davenport, Iowa, and know others who have as well. Would love to talk to you. On Rick Rasmer's re-release episode, which is 480, Wood Geo writes, I live in Walla Walla and had a Bigfoot walk by my camper during deer hunting in Tucson. Wow, I'm going to start that over. I live in Walla Walla and had a Bigfoot walk by my camper during deer hunting in Tucson. I met a couple guys who look for Bigfoot, and they showed me a thermal camera of one behind a tree that was swaying back and forth. Lots of sightings here. On the Pennsylvania police officer episode, Helix Fire writes, I'm from the Williamsport, PA area. It's called NEPA, Northeast Pennsylvania, I believe, but it's also pretty close to the center of the state, so I could be wrong. My cousin and I, along with 2 friends, went canoeing this one time on Lycoming Creek near Trout Run, Cogan Station area. And I want to say it was around 10 or 11 years ago, but I can't remember exactly. Anyway, we ended up going way further than we should have and ended up being out well after dark. We had no real plan as far as we were going to stop or getting picked up or anything, and didn't tell anyone what we were doing. Stupid, I know, but we were dumb teenagers without much guidance. We just went to a random spot to have some quick fun late in the day and stopped using our brains, LOL. So we had to carry this big 4-person canoe along with our fishing gear and water all the way back to try and find our starting spot in the dark. It took 3 or more hours just to get back to the general area that we started at. We ended up deciding to cut into this really thick area of tall brush to get out of there, but because we couldn't find the exact spot, we got to the creek at it, and it was getting really late. But we knew it was nearby, and then the road we needed to get back home was directly across this thick brush area somewhere. Now all we had on us, besides the canoe, water, and fishing stuff, was our little pocket knives, my wristwatch, and 2 of us had some cheap flashlights that weren't all that bright, but just bright enough to see where we were walking. As we made our way through whatever we heard, I'll never forget. I grew up hunting and fishing and still enjoy both hobbies to this day. I know what animals are in my area and what sounds they make. It wasn't a bobcat, wasn't a bear, wasn't a coyote or a pack of coyotes, fox, deer, owl, or anything we have around here. I know some people believe that we have mountain lions in the state as well, but I know what they sound like too, and it wasn't that either. This thing was like nothing I'd ever heard of or since. Almost didn't sound real, like something demonic out of a horror movie, but also strangely human-like. Didn't see it at all, but whatever it was let out this extremely deep, loud, and drawn-out growl, and it growled for like 15 seconds straight. Not a yell, whoop, scream, or shout, but a growl. We all heard it and stopped dead in our tracks, and I was in front of the rest of the guys, so I thought I was the most freaked out, considering if whatever this thing was decided to come charging at us, I was the first in line. And it sounded like it was only 20 to 30 feet away or so directly in front of me, and every hair on my body stood up, and I felt a chill come over me from the fear. Then it stopped and just darted off to the right and kept on going into the woods. And whatever it was big. You could hear branches snapping and breaking as it ran. It definitely wasn't a black bear. They don't make noises like that. But that's the largest animal in the woods around here, and the only normal thing that could have moved that loud, that fast. We stood there for a few minutes afterwards, kind of frozen in shock after what we just heard, and didn't really know what to do. Eventually we got out of there, but it freaked me out for life. I'm almost 26 now and still go into the woods, camping, hiking, and hunting, and on the water, fishing and kayaking. But when I do, I always carry a firearm. Also, before anyone comments it, no, we were not drunk or high. I know that's typical dumb teenager stuff, but at that point in time, none of us did that. The only thing I can think of is that what I would explain what I heard is that it was a Sasquatch. But I'm also pretty skeptical when it comes to anything cryptid related at the same time. So to this day, it messes my head up, thinking about what it could have been and what could have happened. All I know is it for sure wasn't a normal animal. Stay safe out there, y'all. Thank you for sharing that. Same episode, I Love Trump writes, back in about 2002 or 3, I was sitting on my front porch in a rural neighborhood about 20 miles north of Memphis. There was a house across the street that had a small tract of land, and at the back of that is a railroad track. While I was sitting there, I heard a roar that had to be from something huge. It scared me so bad that I actually went inside and peeked out the window. I never saw anything, but I couldn't go back outside. I was about 45 years old then, and had never in my life heard anything that loud, long, or deep. I think whatever it was traveled up the train tracks and up to that backyard where small dogs were inside a fence. Thank you for sharing that. In episode 481 about Tennessee, Dan writes, hey, I'm new here. I'm Dennis, live in Tennessee, I-75 area north of Knoxville. Bought a house edge of town, been having encounters for 8 years now. At first, gifts left on picnic table and backyard, thought kids left them. Then rocks thrown at house, thick woods right up to house. Unnatural owl sounds, wood knocks, tree breaks, lots of heavy running sounds at night. Put up trail cams, which helped at first. Then house slaps, 6 and 8 years, always singles me out, knows which room I'm in at night, taps on the window at night, knows when I'm sitting in the dark on my cell phone, sets off my table lamp that I have a touch sensor on, and causes my blood pressure to skyrocket as it's zapping me. Very concerned. Recently heard him on my back deck with very heavy footfalls. Always cloaked, but I can hear him and sense him. Other houses nearby, but they are not bothered. Talked to Scott Carpenter before he died. Said they're all over here. Wife thinks I'm crazy. Feel free to reach out, my friend. Audacious Amber writes on episode 255, which is the Alabama episode, wood knocks equal 1, we see you, 2, you're close to our nest, 3, you're entirely too close. That's really interesting. She also writes, I used to live in East Tennessee, and then I moved on over to Boone and Marion, which is at the Pisgah National Forest. Apparently, I've lived several places where there is either dogman, Bigfoot, or feral people. I didn't know it during the time I was living at these places, though. Amber, please reach out. On the Fort Lewis episode, which is, I believe, 473, Brian writes a few things. Was also stationed at Fort Lewis for a couple years, and if you can ever talk to a former back gate guard, you'll hear some good stories. This is me asking for former back gate guards of Fort Lewis to reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Brian also writes, camped for years in the Tacoma Creek area, which is a survival training area for the U.S. Air Force. Lots of stuff going on there. Heard screams on top of Kalispell Peak. Many structures that I couldn't explain. They definitely weren't shelters constructed by airmen in training. Very cool area. Parker Lake area also. I need to go back because it's been years. That whole Cusick-Usk area is awesome. I left a post about how I was going to Southern Oregon, and Terrian wrote on it some interesting things. If you're in Oregon, I would talk to the loggers in Southern Oregon in Sweet Home or in Lynn County. There are a few that would talk to you, but the few and many bars that might not. But I can tell you, just going to the bar, most people will laugh about the topic, but I can offer this feather for your hat. These beings live in a male-driven rulership, and many females are traded to other tribes for more grounds to hunt, as it widens their clan, or I would call pods. And they have their own varying language with a collective base because, be it made of matter seen or mental operations to them. Very interesting. A lot of interesting things in there, Terry, and you're welcome to reach out and discuss how you've come across that information. comment came in from John on an old episode, one of the Swamp Dog episodes. Bigfoot the Hunter becomes the hunted. Return of Swamp Dog. John writes, we had 3 face-to-face encounters in Connecticut, not just sightings, 2 of which were in our kitchen window, scaring the daylights out of my sister. My father, who is 82nd Airborne paratrooper, set up a trap by leaving the hose turned on in place near the kitchen door in case it returned, which it did. My sister screamed again, and my father ran outside and sprayed it with the hose, thinking it was neighborhood pranksters. For this, it lunged at him and then went back into the woods. After this, my father bought a rifle and kept it by the kitchen door for quite a while that summer. We also had other incidents at the house, as our house was punched at night, breaking the vinyl siding, gifting at our home by placing small piles of stones in the backyard, and also right near our kitchen door. We also had more than a few rock and acorn throwing incidents and a whistling incident which copied my father's whistle exactly in the woods. It was so close a match that I answered back only to realize my father was still at work. This was not in some far-removed wilderness area, not on top of a mountain range, but in Connecticut, a state with a fairly well-developed manufacturing and industrial base, but is still considered 60% woodlands, even in 2024. That is very interesting, John. Pennsylvania Police Officer 425, Michael writes, when I was 12 years old, so around 1996, my dad and I went hunting. We sat on the edge of a field waiting for groundhogs. And after about 15 minutes, my dad said, "What was that?" Kind of censored that in a whisper. Then he told me to turn his way slowly and look at a certain area. We watched through our scopes what we can only describe as a juvenile Bigfoot walk on 2 legs across the opposite edge of the field and back into the woods. Watched it close for a minute, and I don't think it even saw us. Talked about that many times since. Rip Pops, love you. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Comment on the Great Barrington, Berkshire's Mass episode 423, I think. Esther writes, yep, my first BF sighting was in Berkshires also. Lots there, and after that summer, it's kept happening. Connecticut also. Bear Mountain, October Mountain, and Balance Rock. All 3 spots while quadding. Would love to talk to you, Esther. Remember, anyone in this episode that I'm reading their comments, I'd love to have you reach out. Episode 476, the other comment episode. JP writes, hey, that's me. Since then, my mother has seen a face with a shoulder-length, lightish colored hair looking in the window at her at 2 a.m. The next day, I called the police, who looked around but didn't see anything unusual. There's also times where the dog will refuse to go out to use the bathroom after sniffing the air a bunch. It's never done this before. Can't help but wonder. Episode Bigfoot on My Family Farm, which takes place in Missouri. Merle writes, I live just north of the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. We have a number of wooded county wildlife reserves. All these reserves are just a number of thousands of acres. The park closest to me, Elm Creek Park Reserve, is 7,000 acres. There have been claims of sightings in some of the parks. If anyone has info about that, please reach out. Here's a nice comment that came in on the Fred Roll episode. Alex writes, I believe this man. Sometimes I sit back and think to myself, wow, what if these things really are real? I believe in them, but sometimes it sets me back hearing these stories. It's very sobering. People have to wake up and accept that there's stuff out there we don't have answers to, that can't be made sense of or explained to the average human. I believe, in great interview, I've fallen in love with this channel. Thank you for all the hard work you put into all of this. It's very appreciated in so many ways, my brother. Thank you so much for that, Alex. A lot of stuff coming in on the Pennsylvania police officer episode still. Debbie writes, the one I saw was either dark brown or black. Saw it border of southern Kansas and Oklahoma off the old Cherokee Trail in Arkansas City, Kansas. We're on, I believe, the southwest edge of the Flint Hills. The Arkansas River runs through here also. And I took my dog out like midnight, and I saw it down a small decline on edge of the street directly under a streetlight. The corner of Windsor Road and Valley View Drive. I still think about it and have PTSD over it. I couldn't see any facial features, only the eyes and physique. Not the feet. It was at least 7 feet. On the Bigfoot on My Family Farm episode, Jameis writes, I've been paralleled out of the woods in Wisconsin, and I don't have the guts to tell anyone what I think it was. This content helps. Thank you. I'm not crazy. You are not crazy. That goes to anyone who's had an experience. You are not crazy. Thank you for sharing. Episode 481, Bigfoot Encounters, Tales from the Comments, Tennessee. Diana writes, me right now just got whistled at 30 minutes ago, samurai talk, and I've heard whoops and giant owls. I got video and pics yet hear back from no one, I believe it says. Diana, it looks like you have some interesting things happening. You are welcome to reach out. In the Bigfoot on My Family Farm episode in Missouri, the Marlboro Mandalorian, which is probably the best username I've ever heard. That's wow. That's very funny. Good job. Heard a tale told of a guy having an encounter in the Barn City area in recent history. With you being in the Iowa area, might be worth going down there and asking the farmers who farm near the rivers. Think they have a Legion Hall or a VFW down there too. I know there's got to be something. Best place to start asking is where all the people are. Absolutely. Also, I don't condone smoking, but the Mandalorian thing is hilarious. So, good job. Arthur writes, our family land is in East Tennessee, and I've seen these beings multiple times. Absolutely reach out. On my post saying that I was coming out to Oregon, Ruined Temple wrote a few interesting things. Have you ever thought of coming up to Clackamas County? Only every day. Just hasn't happened yet. We have the most reports amongst all the counties in Oregon. I live just about a mile off of the Oregon Bigfoot Highway, as named by researcher Joe Bielart in his book of the same name, a.k.a. Highway 224, between Eagle Creek and Estacada. I've lived in this area pretty much my entire life. I love that book. There's a Skookum Lake up that highway and sightings that go far back into history. The forest that the highway cuts through is part of the Mount Hood National Forest, and Mount Hood isn't too terribly far away. It stands very visible on the eastern horizon outside my bedroom window. My partner and I experienced what we believe to have been activity in the trees along a tiny creek on his family's 5-acre property last summer and during the 2020 wildfires. There's this occasional odd call you might hear late at night. There have also been three unrelated individuals who have each separately told me that they witnessed what sounds to me like a dogman upright canid. All three sightings allegedly took place within 2 to 3 miles of each other at most, one on the road behind our property, and the other two occurring on the road and in a field to the left side of the road in front of our property that our driveway comes out on. And each sighting was years apart from the next. A bit unnerving that our house sits right between these sighting spots, and if they're to be believed, then one could probably assume that they've used our property to get from point A to point B, and possibly for hunting, since we have large fields and small oak groves with plenty of prey species. Cliff Berkman's Bigfoot Museum is just about, probably an 8-mile drive toward the Sandy Boring area along Highway 26. You should consider coming up this way to do a little sniffing around. I'd consider putting you up for a few days if it were all right with my mom, who lives with me, since accommodations out here are pretty scant and a bit, shall we say, vintage, LOL. Thank you for the nice offer. Eventually, I do plan on getting up to that area, and it almost did happen. Well, a lot of people are like, you should do that when you're in the Oak Ridge area. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to get out of there. And you'll find out what happened soon enough. It was very busy, we'll say, in Oak Ridge. Central Tennessee Under Siege. This is a Roger Williams re-release. Maria writes, wow, Bigfoot in Tennessee. I live in Northern California, and after it rained, my family and I went on a hike right down where we lived. We came upon a big footprint in the mud. It wasn't human, so we made a plaster-type mold of it. It's in the museum in Willow Creek, California. It was a Bigfoot print. There's lots of evidence now at the Bigfoot Willow Creek Museum. Check it out. That's a cool place, from what I hear. Let's see. Going back to Encounter Palooza 1, which is a members-only episode, 477, Zach writes, as a resident near Estacada, Oregon, I can confirm they are here, and it's honestly crazy how much evidence is out here. I heard a roar, too. It was like a lion and gorilla combined. That's a really good way to say that, actually. I'm going to remember that for reasons that'll come out later. Then it started knocking over limbs and making a lot of noise while running away. That was a promontory park outside of Estacada about 13 years ago. One came into our camp one time, and I'm a light sleeper, and it snuck into our camp without us knowing until it was right next to my tent. And I didn't see it, but I've never had bears or cougars wake me up in a dead sleep and put you into a state of paralysis. And it walked out so quiet, it was insane. And what's funny is I thought it just happened to me because I woke up. But my buddy woke up to it too, but we didn't say anything until the following morning. At the same camp another time, we had a clear as day knock that sounded like a baseball bat being smacked on a tree. We were there for 4 days and seen one other human the whole time. I also worked in Colton and heard stories. Reason for not hearing them possibly is because of the fires the last few years has been spreading them out. It's been really bad for forest fires. Sorry for the long comment, but my spot is between Colton and Estacada up Hillockburn Road. Never heard of aggressive Bigfoots around the PNW. Very interesting comment. Thank you for sharing, Zach. On the Bigfoot on My Family Farm, Missouri episode, Vicky writes, that would be really freaky to run into. Clay County is about an hour away from where my mom was raised in Slayersville. Beautiful county, but perfect area for cryptids. I got to get back that way to see family, hike, and camp off trail. You won't find any beautiful land than in Kentucky. Also on Encounter Palooza 1, Bill writes, I grew up in Oak Ridge, Oregon. Several people I know have seen Bigfoot, including me and my parents. Bill, you got to reach out, my friend. I would love to talk to you. I've also seen several UFOs over Oak Ridge and nearby there. One day at high school in physics class, I described a UFO I saw the night before. Everyone laughed at me. Then the girl in class named Sherry spoke and described the same craft that landed in a field behind her house that night. She was student body president, so they definitely respected her more than me. Maybe Bigfoot are flying the UFOs. Bill, I would love to talk to you. A fun comment came in on Monsterfest Live episode. Rust Heisenberg, also a great username. Good job. Hi, Jeremiah and Justin. This is Nick. I'm the volunteer who worked the audio for the podcast at Monsterfest. It was great to meet you both, and I really enjoyed helping. Nick is a cool dude. Thank you, Nick. You helped everything go off without a hitch during that episode. It was great to have a guy running the soundboard. I appreciate you, my friend. Good to see you again. Episode 476, Horrifying Bigfoot Encounters from the comments. Ban Everything writes, my friend and I were both growled at after walking only 150 to 200 feet down separate forks of Bod Cow logging road to hunt in LaSalle Parish, Louisiana, by what sounded like giant monsters. I ran and he was already in the truck with the doors locked. What a cool guy. Man, he just locked you right out, didn't he? The closest sound I can compare to is an amplified growl of a lion or tiger. I felt it hit my face and chest, and I'm sure there are others who understand what I'm trying to describe. An older friend of my brother said a white monster tried to overturn his van one night while parking with his girlfriend on the road, but we didn't believe him. Very interesting. I was able to interview Dwayne from Oak Ridge in episode 466. Roscoe writes, I've been to Blair Lake a dozen times. Fishing is great. It's up there. Road sucks. Devil's Lake is nice too. Wouldn't camp up there though. Everything parallel to Waldo is Bigfoot zone. Roscoe, please reach out. Let me know what you know, my friend. Great Barrington episode. Fly by Jim says, hi, I live in Lee, Mass, next to October Mountain. I lived in and around Great Barrington all my life. It's such a beautiful area. You're lucky. I just wanted to say there have been other reports of Bigfoot activity. Look up Bigfoot sighting on October Mountain, Lee, Mass. Absolutely. And if you know anything, please reach out. We were chased out of the Iowa woods by 4 Bigfoot, 319. This is a fun one. But the comments, Lo-Fi Highbrow, cool username. He mentions the Driftless area. I had some sort of encounter in the Driftless area in circa 1997. I never saw anything, but I was walked out of the forest after an extreme feeling of being watched. It was terrifying, and I've always remembered it. It wasn't until I've heard some podcast YouTube channels 30 years later that I realized that everything aligns with others' experience in regards to detail. I have no explanation for what occurred. It remains one of the most frightening memories in my life. Lo-Fi, feel free to reach out. In the episode Bigfoot and the Face-to-Face with Bigfoot, Real Stories from New England, I believe that was Norma's re-release. Screaming Celt writes, no idea how your channel came up in my feed. That said, October of 2023, I was in the Monroe, Upper Stepney area of Connecticut for a few weeks. It was after midnight on October 17th that I went outside for a cigarette when I noticed all the dogs in the area within a mile radius barking. Not the type of barking that dogs would do over a siren, but more of the aggressive something is here in close bark. Normally, there are quite a few owls that constantly vocalize as well, but they were silent. The dogs had already been barking for a couple minutes, and when I began to hear repeated short-duration screaming, long-duration whooping coming from a north-northeast direction. This went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. The source of the sounds had quite a bit of power behind the vocalizations to be able to carry the way it did. My rough guesstimate was about 2 clicks away. I'm originally from SoCal, and I'm well acquainted with the vocalizations of coyotes, black bears, mountain lions, barn owls, great horned owls, as I've lived in and around the proximity of the Santa Monica Mountains and Los Padres National Forest. This was not any of these, and I know there are no mountain lions in Connecticut or Mass. So I'm going to stop you right there because... we're not going to get on this rabbit trail, but I'm pretty sure there are. I grew up in Western Mass, and we totally had them in the 80s, but sorry, that's a rabbit trail. I checked Google Maps afterwards and seemed like the vocalizations were coming from the Lanes Mine Nature Park area. It was afterwards when I was wondering where I heard similar vocals did I realize they sounded like the Sierra Camp recordings. After the vocalization stopped, it was at least several minutes before I could hear the owls again, but they were tentative, like a gravitas had settled into the area. Spoke to a few of the people in the area over the next couple of days, and they too stated they'd heard similar sounds in the past, but don't know what type of animal to attribute to. Screaming Celt, very interesting. Sorry, it's Celt. Celt is for Celtics. Celt is for Celtics. All right. Thank you for sharing this, and sorry for my mental rabbit trails in that comment. Next up, from Horrifying Bigfoot Encounters from the comments, 476, The Given Driven, which is fun to say. I've got some Meadville, Sagertown, County Line, Crawford, Mercer County Dogman stories. This is becoming a thing where people are reaching out with Dogman stories, and I don't know what to do with it because I'm trying to focus on Bigfoot. But the more that I get into it, I feel that these two cryptids are very related. I'm really not sure what to do with this, guys. You can reach out. My first focus will always be Bigfoot, though. Same episode. Barry writes, I love hearing Dogman sightings. I got sick of Sasquatch when the topic was splashed all over mainstream TV and all they did was chase their own tails. Then I came across the Dogman episode by accident because I thought Dogman was a joke, but hearing the stories, I started to think they could exist. Then I found SC Chronicles, which I think that's Sasquatch Chronicles. Go West. That covered both topics, and it brought me back to listening about Sasquatch again. This channel, especially since I hunt mushrooms and camp all around Oak Ridge. Yeah, dude. Love Oak Ridge. Still haven't had a sighting. Did have a big rock get thrown into Staley Creek around midnight while camping by myself. I always camp by myself, but that was it. Nothing more. Barry, thanks for putting that in the comments. Please reach out if anything else happens to you around Oak Ridge. Here's a fun, longer comment with some interesting things in it from the same episode. Kristen writes, I love this episode. Yes, definitely consider Jeremiah doing this once a week. I would love to hear Perry's story in interview format. So would I. Dale mentioned a story about a little girl in a cabin. I, too, have heard that story in another podcast or show. So, yeah, that story is out there somewhere. Okay, cool. A couple people gave little tidbits of information about sounds. That was fun to hear, too. One guy said he's worked 20 years in a type of animal sanctuary and mentioned the raven and other animals can be pinpointed in the Sierra sounds. This would be fun for him to record what he hears every day so we can compare for ourselves. Absolutely. If that guy's listening, please reach out. I don't think the Sierra sounds are normal animals we know of because there's far too much going on between knocks, high chatter, samurai talk, and the men pinpointing two creatures across a creek, but can give us confirmation that these creatures have their own language and the ability to mimic. I don't mind Dogman stories, but you asked if you should include them. I like you stay true to Bigfoot only. Absolutely. Now, if a listener has a Bigfoot story and a Dogman was seen at the same time, find that okay and interesting. All right, good to know. I find that people tend to group Sasquatch, Red-Eye, Bigfoot, 3 to 4-toed creatures like the Boggy Creek Monster and Dogman into the same group as being the same thing. I don't think that at all. I wish we can separate and study them as best as we can as separate entities. Love the podcast and thank you for not only keeping this a safe place for people who have had encounters, but also a safe place for people to comment without ridicule. Keep up the great work. We love and appreciate your safe spot for all. Thank you so much for the great comments. And also, I will say, it is okay to comment. No, how do I want to say this? Everyone can comment, but not everyone can stick around. And what I mean by that is that I am constantly muting people that are just being absolutely not cool in the comments towards people I'm interviewing them. And I try to get them out of here as quick as possible. So everyone can comment. Not everyone can stick around. So just guys, be nice. Help keep this an area where people feel free to be interviewed about their encounters. There's a lot of people that have unfortunately seen comments that I've not gotten quickly enough and just don't get interviewed because of it. So be nice, guys. Bigfoot Ranch Part 1, 263. Danny writes, I love this. I just moved from Van Buren, beautiful countryside. Beautiful countryside. It's very remote. I thought I had seen crossing the Des Moines River down there, but it was so dusk, couldn't make it out. But I've heard some really strange sounds down there. Would love to hear more. Sasquatch Stories of Western North Carolina, Macon County episode, The Gypsy King. It's a great username, too. I was camped in Ocala National Forest, that's down in Florida, for a month. Everything was fine till the last 5 days. Had at least 2 Bigfoot coming into my camp. Had to leave because things kept getting more freaky each day. Love to hear about that. There's an individual that keeps commenting that has some really interesting stuff. Name is Cypher X. I would love to talk to Cypher X. If that individual could reach out to my email, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. I'm going to read some of the stuff that this individual has put in the Fort Lewis episode. One time, a friend and I were exploring the fields and woods behind my house. It was probably 2001-ish. We were in grade school. Something ran up really fast on us and some really tall hay grass coming up into the tree line. It was so fast and forceful, a bunch of dust and dry dirt kicked up, and when we got our eyes on for a split second, it looked like a tiny toddler gorilla standing like a human toddler child, pure black with a cone head. Needless to say, we all ran from each other and ran back to the house. My friend called her mom to pick her up because she had an issue, and we never spoke to each other again when we would see each other at school, and of course, our parents didn't believe that we saw a baby gorilla in the woods. Individual also writes, yes, this red-haired Sasquatch. I had one on my porch as a kid when I was home alone trying to open my locked front door, and it was crawling around on all fours. Holy mackerel, Cypher. Reach out. We need to talk. I literally fainted and woke up on my kitchen floor after seeing it through my blinds. I was watching TV and saw my doorknob jiggling. We could see the front door through a window, so I checked, and my mind was so overwhelmed with seeing a ginger orangutan-looking thing trying to open my doors, I fainted with fear. This was among my many encounters over my childhood from the 90s into the early 2000s. Individual also writes, hello, fellow Seattle resident here. I grew up in Everson with tons of experiences. Maybe I'll send you some stories if I take the time to type it all out. Or just send me an email with how to contact you, and we can go down that route if you don't want to type it all out, but it's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and edit the comment a little bit next. That's on the country video. Country, the Oklahoma Bigfoot bounty hunter. Roy Horn writes, around the area of Cogar, Oklahoma, there's a place where Bigfoot dogmen are rumored to be, supposed to be a much more aggressive Bigfoot, possibly life-threatening, certainly dangerous. There are reports of infrasound attacks, rocks or sticks thrown, and worse if rumors are to be believed. I currently live about 5 miles away. I've never heard any stories or rumors as I was growing up about anything or any strange happenings in the area from my dad or my grandparents who had lived in this area all their lives. And that's not to say that the rumors from others aren't true. The area is definitely capable of hiding something that would want to stay hidden. There's certainly more than enough natural resources for a group of Bigfoot/dogmen to live and remain hidden. Lots of canyons and heavy tree cover in the area. Roy, feel free to reach out. From the re-release of Martin Grove's episode, Joe writes, in 1966, my Boy Scout Troop 381 from Columbus, Ohio was camping at the LBL. First scout troop to do so. We had 30 boys, 6 dads, and 4 troop leaders. One night around 2:30 a.m., something let out a super loud roar or scream that also vibrated the ground and air. We grabbed our flashlights and out of the tent we went. Everyone was up. It was hard going back to sleep after that. Just remember, we were not thinking Bigfoot or Dogman in August of 1966. For those keeping track, October of 67 is when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out. Not to say weird stuff wasn't happening before that, but that's what he was kind of alluding to. Well, that's what I got from it. But thank you, Joe. From the Brace for the Unknown, a father's vigil in Oklahoma's Bigfoot territory, Kelly writes, I live outside of Smithville. It's a wild place with strange stuff about. I'm in my 60s and have been here a while, seen and heard some strange things. Please reach out. Pennsylvania police officer. Project 39 writes, me and a buddy had one follow us out the woods up Moraine one night. We were night fishing of 528 down a long trail, left the spot around 3 to 4 a.m. Soon as we got into the woods, we heard something run up towards us through a bunch of brush and just stop. We stood still. I thought bear, and so did he after we talked. Not sure how far the trail is, but it's probably a good 20 to 30 minute hike. We could hear it pacing us about 30 to 40 yards in the tree line. When you'd shine the light, nothing would stop. It would stop. As we got closer to the truck, it ran off like a freight train. All we saw was a big 8 to 10 foot. Sorry, earlier I meant to say 30 to 40 feet in the tree line. It's been a while since I've read feet or yards abbreviations. All we saw was a big 8 to 10 foot tall, dark giant gorilla human figured shape. We joked about Bigfoot trying to scare each other, still thinking bear, but in the back of mind, I had a feeling and always wished to see one. The entire hike, we was a nervous wreck. Just knowing something's right there, just out sight of the flashlights. Knowing something's right there watching and stalking you is a bad feeling. And I don't fear much, but that night I was scared. We've heard strange sounds up there plenty of times. Something trying to sound like a coyote, strange woman-type screams, but not human. At least we didn't think so. Screams always came from across the lake where you're not allowed to fish. This was probably 20 to 25 years ago. Still feel nervous up there at night. Even with a group of people, I'll get those strange feelings of being watched. From 449, face-to-face with Bigfoot and my dog paid the price. Nature 10879 says, people that come here to BFS are like-minded. Please feel free to share your story. Thank you. This individual gets it. Here's another really nice comment that came in from Kristen on Sasquatch Siege of Staten Island, which that episode you guys either really like or you really hate. There's no middle ground on Sasquatch Siege of Staten Island. So thanks to those that gave it a try. I loved it. Anyways, Kristen says, I noticed over the last years, guests and other podcasters used to be about what they thought Bigfoot is and their own individual encounters. Now it seems that guests and other podcasters are back to all-knowing. I'm glad you're not like this. I'm glad you stayed into the narrative of people having a safe place to talk, share, and comment without getting blasted. Some of these bigger podcasters are getting too big for their britches. They will only listen to questions or comments that fit them. Even as a listener, I too want a safe space to openly ask real, honest questions. Guests are the same way lately in their all-knowing attitude. Can't wait for your next interview, Jeremiah. Kristen, I'm glad you get it. My main focus on Bigfoot Society is always giving individuals a place where they can feel safe, a respectful environment. They're not going to be made fun of. They can share whatever they need to. And it doesn't fit an agenda. So it doesn't matter if it's a person who's seen what they think is a huge ape in southeast Oklahoma, or if it's an individual who's a psychotherapist who had Bigfoot encounters in Staten Island near New York City. It doesn't matter. It could be mind speak, or it could be almost a straight up gorilla in the Pacific Northwest. My goal is not to get Bigfoot discovered. It's to help people that are dealing with what they've experienced. And that will always be the goal of Bigfoot Society. And if it changes, you guys need to leave, because that means that I've fallen off my train, which I hope if I have anything to do with it, will never happen. So buckle up for another 20, 25 years, guys. Speaking of Sasquatch Siege of Staten Island, Toro writes, FYI, if I remember correctly, there was some past reports of a Bigfoot-type creature in the 1973 or 74 time frame called Trasquatch in historic Richmond Town, Staten Island. In the historic restoration area, 2 teenage boys saw it by a dump. Boys were so scared that the NYPD ESU was called. They thought it might be a bear or escaped gorilla. A couple in the church parking lot near the same area, next to cemetery on Clark Avenue area, and another sighting in the area by nurse from Great Kills saw it while driving home at night. Creature was never found. I remember reading this in a small article in the SI Advance newspaper about 20 years ago, give or take a few. Toro, thank you for that information. That kind of backs up what our friend was saying in episode 471 about Staten Island. In the Pennsylvania police officer episode, Nurse D writes, was hunting with my family at age 12 in northeast Lehigh County. I got separated during a mountaintop drive of the woods, and I came out of the woods to a field, then crossed the field to go towards my godparents' farm. I sat across the field waiting for someone else to surface, and I had binoculars with me and started to scan the woodline for others. As I went past a huge tree, I saw something standing behind the tree peeking out. So I focused on this, and to my surprise, it had long, waving brown hair in the wind. I could only see its left arm, lower leg, and partial face. Scared me, but I thought it was a bear at that age. Now that I'm older, I know I saw a squatch, and in my 60s today, I wonder if that squatch was tracking me. They're definitely real. Roger Williams' episode, Under Siege by Sasquatch in Central Tennessee. Brecca writes, I live probably about 20 miles from this guy if my review of the road he mentioned is correct. I live in the McBurg-Delrose area of south central Tennessee, and I had something very tall lurking out my window one night at 2 a.m. I heard at first a deep growl followed by what I can only describe as a frantic cow. Sounded similar to the Ohio cow, with a little more extreme pitch, I later found out. And I stood up to go see what was going on outside, thinking my neighbor's cows were out, and just glanced at my window and saw 2 glowing eyes. It looked at me, and we stared at each other for a few seconds, and then it walked off. My house is built up on a stone foundation. Those eyes were at 5 feet 9 inches, I measured, making this Creature probably about 6 feet. We've had some other odd stuff, including something approaching my son from the woodline at night, making a sound that he could only describe as a death rattle, lung-sucking, and groaning noise. He wrote it up as a large wounded animal, but didn't stick around to find out what it was. And something also struck his camper the second night after he moved into it, parked in our backyard. He said it sounded like something tripped over the metal stairs and caused the entire camper to shake. The next day, he found no cause for the sound, no downed limbs or other reasons for the disturbance. I'm a scientist, so I can't just pass these off as Bigfoot because I need more evidence. But after a year of dwelling on my encounter and looking into all the possibilities, I have no answers, other than my cat was outside growling at a deer besides my window who sounded like a cow. That didn't leave tracks. And 2 lightning bugs were hovering and glowing at the same time passed by my window. Wow. Wow, guys. I can't believe that is a weird way to say window. That is a leftover from my time in New England. Sorry, guys. It's window. Staying lit longer than usual at 2 a.m. in mid-40-degree weather. It's all I got. Thank you, Brecca, for sharing that. That's extremely interesting. Back to the Martin Groves episode. John writes, just another comment I'd like to make about this episode. This is an incredible story. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I live in central North Carolina, but I've hunted throughout the Southeast, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and West Virginia. I'm usually armed with nothing more than bow and arrow, and I've been a hunter for over 50 years, and I've never had an encounter, or for that matter, have never had anything unusual happen while in the woods, but I'm pretty sure these things are out there. Within a 50-mile radius of me, there are probably 20 or more sightings, and I've heard an eyewitness account from a lady about 20 miles from me who has seen Bigfoot 5 times. She's very credible. I believe that I have continuous activity around my home that started in 2017. In the early spring, I like to keep my windows open at night as it tends to cool things off a bit. And one evening after midnight, I was at my desk playing on my laptop when I hear outside my window what sounds like rocks clacking together. It was a slow, rhythmic clacking that lasted for about 20 seconds, then a pause for about 30 seconds. Then the clacking started back up, and this time faster and louder, and once again maybe 20 seconds. Finally, the clacking started again after a pause, but even louder and more rapid. Scared me good. From that point forward, I've heard screams and huffs outside my window. I hear whistles and something has hit the side of the house, causing a low vibration. This has happened several times. The area where I live doesn't get a lot of snow. We average about 6 inches a year, but back in 2021, we had a 3-inch snowfall. I look out the back of the house and notice a line of tracks going through my backyard. By the way, I took pictures of the tracks. I would love to see them. I live in a rural area about 20 miles east of Raleigh. My closest neighbor is about 80 yards away, and the odd thing about the tracks is that they were about 17 inches long, and from heel to toe were about 4.5 feet apart. I will also add that the tracks were in a straight line. Of course, I don't know what made the tracks, but I'm certainly suspicious. On one other thing I will mention, I certainly can't see a connection, but along the same time, I had a UFO sighting, and the craft was crystal clear. It was massive and flew barely above the treetops, was being chased, followed by a helicopter. The craft was completely concentric, made no sound, and my sighting lasted maybe 7 to 8 seconds before it faded from view. Definitely a lot of strange stuff around here. John, thank you for sharing that. That is incredibly interesting. Those are the comments from the last few weeks. Again, thank you so much for commenting what you've seen on YouTube comments. I try to hit everyone and read everyone. It is getting harder to get them all, especially if you're replying. If you're replying to a comment, there's a chance I won't see it. If it's a brand new comment, I probably will see it. If you really want to make sure that your encounter gets to me, you could send it to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, if you sent it to me in that email and I haven't gotten back to you, give me about 2 weeks to get back to you. I get a lot every day, guys, but it's worth it to go through everything. And most of the interviews actually come from the YouTube comments. So again, thank you for listening. Appreciate you all being here. You could be anywhere else, but you've chosen to be part of the Bigfoot Society, and I appreciate you guys for it. It's a safe place to share And I feel it's going to be one of the places where the real information is coming out. Thanks again, guys. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.